The end of one war, the start of another. April 28, 1945, outside Berlin. Wehrmacht Obergefreiter Cornelius Rost crouched in a destroyed apartment building as Soviet tanks rumbled past. The Third Reich was collapsing, his unit gone. He dropped his rifle and raised his hands as Red Army soldiers kicked through the door. A boot slammed into his ribs amid Russian commands he didn't understand. Rough hands stripped his insignia, his belt, his wedding ring. He became prisoner number 311089 in seconds. The Soviet officer who processed him barely looked up. Through a translator, Rost learned his fate. Military tribunal, war crimes, 25 years hard labor. There was no recognizable trial, no opportunity to speak. The sentence came from a typewritten form, his guilt sealed for having served 3 years on the Eastern Front. 300 prisoners were packed into cattle cars designed for 40. The train lurched eastward on May the 2nd, and Rost wedged himself against rough wooden slats, knees to his chest. The man beside him, a former panzer commander, had a suppurating thigh wound that smelled like rotting meat. He lasted 4 days before guards opened the door at a nameless station and dragged out 11 bodies, his among them. The door slammed shut after 30 seconds of fresh air. Each day brought the same ration: 200 grams of stone-hard black bread, a cup of water, and sometimes a thin soup with cabbage leaves floating in grease. Men gnawed the bread slowly, making it last, storing crumbs. Some traded rations for promises, addresses of loved ones who might be contacted if they survived. Most promises would never be kept. After 2 weeks, the train crossed the Urals. The landscape through the gaps in the wooden slats became an alien expanse of endless forests and vast empty plains. The temperature dropped despite the approaching summer, and men huddled together for warmth, distinctions of rank forgotten. A former colonel froze to death one night, pressed so tightly against other sleeping men that they didn't notice until morning. The guards were NKVD troops, not regular Red Army, and they showed no mercy. When a prisoner begged for water in broken Russian, a guard urinated through the slat opening. The car fell silent. No one begged again. Rost learned the fundamental rule: survive by becoming invisible, by requiring nothing, by showing no weakness that might provoke violence. 5 weeks into the journey, the train stopped in Magadan. Rost glimpsed the grey sea of Okhotsk, the edge of the Soviet Empire. Guards barked commands as the doors opened. 273 men remained from the original 300. They were herded onto trucks for a 16-hour drive north on unpaved roads that became mud trenches. The landscape morphed into tundra, low shrubs, scattered larch trees, and permafrost. This was Kolyma, the coldest inhabited region on Earth, where winter could reach -60 degrees Celsius, and where Stalin sent prisoners to mine gold. Camp 503 materialized from the grey landscape like an industrial hell. Guard towers, triple rows of electrified barbed wire, and precisely arranged wooden barracks. A minehead dominated the view, its tracks vanishing into the mountainside. Everywhere, skeletal prisoners in padded jackets moved with the shuffle of the barely alive. Processing took 3 hours. Guards stripped the men naked in the cold, searching every cavity for contraband. A medical orderly gave each a 5-second glance, stamping paperwork without comment. Rost received his camp number 31089 to be sewn on every garment he wore. All personal items were confiscated. He was issued the camp uniform, a quilted jacket and trousers, felt boots, a shapka hat with ear flaps, and thin cotton gloves useless against the coming winter. The camp commandant, a NKVD major named Petrov, addressed the new arrivals. His speech was brief, delivered through an interpreter. You are enemies of the Soviet people. You will work. You will mine gold. Your quota is 5 cubic meters of rock per day. Meet your quota, receive full rations. Fail, receive punishment rations. Attempt escape, face execution. Rost believed the commandant's final words, "There is nowhere to run. The tiger will kill you faster than our bullets." The camp sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, with nothing but wilderness beyond. No roads, no villages. The nearest city, Magadan, was a 16-hour drive away. Any escapee would face forests, rivers, predators, and a cold that killed in hours. The camp's real walls were thousands of kilometers of deadly emptiness. Barracks 14 became Rost's new home, wooden bunks stacked 3 high, 60 men crammed into a leaky space built for 40. Wind howled through gaps in the boards. A single stove provided meager heat from rationed coal. The bunks had thin, lice-infested straw mattresses. Within a week, Rost was infested like everyone else. His bunkmate, a Ukrainian named Andriy Koval, had survived for 18 months. Weighing perhaps 50 kilograms, his skin stretched tight over bone, Koval's eyes were alert. He understood the camp's unwritten rules. "Trust no one completely," he whispered that first night. "The guards have informers who trade secrets for extra bread. Desperate men betray anyone. Survive first, everything else second." The routine began at 0500 with a clanging bell. Prisoners had 10 minutes to dress, use the latrine pit, and assemble for roll call. The count lasted an hour, regardless of temperature, as men stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness. Those who collapsed were dragged to the infirmary, many never to return. Breakfast followed, 300 grams of dense sawdust-laced bread, 20 grams of sugar, and hot water called tea. Rost ate slowly, making his stomach believe it was more. He watched others wolf down their rations in seconds, then sit staring, already thinking of the next meal 12 hours away. At 0630, guards marched the prisoners 3 kilometers to the mine. Rost's brigade worked in Adit 7, hacking at the rock face with pickaxes and hauling debris. The air was thick with rock dust that turned spit black, the only light from carbide lamps casting monstrous shadows. Timbers groaned under the mountain's weight. Tunnels occasionally collapsed. Sometimes the bodies were recovered. The quota system ruled everything, 5 cubic meters of broken rock per man per day. Foreman Volkov kept meticulous records. Those who met quota received 800 grams of bread for dinner. Those who failed received 400. After a few days below quota, starvation began its irreversible work. The death spiral was mathematical and merciless. Rost quickly learned survival required understanding the camp's hidden economy. Bread was currency, traded for needle and thread, tobacco, or a place closer to the stove. Some gambled their rations in card games, risking starvation for a temporary surplus, while others hoarded crumbs against the day sickness would prevent work. Foreman Volkov ran his own system of exploitation. He controlled work assignments, selling easier locations where rock was softer for bribes of food or favors. Those who couldn't pay, like Rost, worked the hardest seams, breaking themselves against stone, while others met quotas with half the effort. But Rost had been a carpenter. He understood tools and efficiency. He studied the rock's geometry, letting its natural fracture lines do the work, and learned from Siberian veterans. Within 2 weeks, despite his hard assignment, Rost was meeting his quota. It was just enough to stay alive. He kept his head down, especially around the Urkas, professional criminals who ran the black market and collaborated with guards. At night, lying on his bunk, while lice crawled over his skin, Rost thought about his wife Margareta and daughter Irmgard, 6 years old when he last saw her. He suspected correspondence from Kolyma was purely theoretical. He was being erased from the world, buried alive in Siberia. June brought Kolyma's brief summer. Temperatures climbed to 15 degrees Celsius, and mosquitoes emerged in biblical swarms from the swamps. But the warmth was deceptive. Koval warned him that winter returned in September with annihilating force. "Men die by the hundreds in winter," he said. "Survival requires resources you build in summer." July brought a new arrival to Barracks 14, a German doctor named Friedrich Schenk captured in Königsberg and sentenced to 25 years. A dignified, grey-haired man of 53, Schenk quickly became invaluable. He treated injuries with improvised materials, cloth strips for bandages, pine resin for antiseptic, saving lives where the camp infirmary was indifferent. One evening, Schenk examined a suppurating wound on Rost's hand from a slipped pickaxe. He cleaned and wrapped it carefully. "You're strong," Schenk observed quietly. "You meet quota, keep your head down, but strength alone won't get you through 25 years. No one survives a full sentence in Kolyma. The statistics are clear. You must escape or die here." Rost stared at the doctor. Escape was a forbidden thought, punishable by execution. "The camp is impossible to escape," Schenk continued, his eyes serious. "But the tiger, the distance, the cold, those are problems that can be solved with knowledge, planning, and opportunity. I've been observing. There are ways, Cornelius, difficult ways, unlikely ways, but ways." For the first time since his capture, Rost allowed himself to think beyond survival. He thought about walls that weren't walls, and a wilderness that killed but might be survived. The camp seemed inescapable, but Schenk's words planted a seed of possibility. The sun hung low on the horizon, bathing the barracks in perpetual twilight. Lying on his bunk, Cornelius Rost began to think about walking out of this place alive, not in 25 years, sooner, much sooner. Chapter 2. Hell frozen, over his destination was Cape Desnev, Asia's easternmost point, a lead mine, where the sun vanished for months on end. This was not a stalag with neat lines of barbed wire. It was a corner of the planet designed to kill. The work was soul-crushing, 12 hours a day mining toxic lead ore in perpetual twilight with little more than hand tools. The cold was a physical entity, a predator gnawing at flesh and bone, reaching temperatures of -40 degrees. Frostbite was constant, turning fingers and toes black. The NKVD guards were not overtly sadistic. They were worse. They were indifferent, overseers of a human meat grinder. A man who collapsed was simply dragged away. A complaint was met with a rifle butt or a reduction in the already starvation-level rations. The greatest fear was not summary execution. It was the slow, creeping death from lead poisoning, which turned the skin grey and the mind to mush. Rost watched proud soldiers waste away into hollow-eyed spectres, their spirits extinguished long before their bodies finally gave out. Reveille was a steel bar clanging against the barrack wall at 4 a.m. Rost learned instantly that survival meant speed. The 200 prisoners of Barrack 7 had 8 minutes to dress, use the frozen latrine trench, and form ranks. Those who stumbled out late received no breakfast. On that first morning, 3 men didn't make it. One remained on his wooden bunk, too weak from dysentery to stand. The guard, a Kazakh sergeant named Baimukhanov, noted the bunk number on a clipboard and moved on. The man would be dead in 2 days, his rations redistributed without ceremony. Roll call happened in the 38-degree darkness. Rost stood in formation wearing everything he owned. Thin prison trousers, a quilted jacket with its cotton batting compressed to nothing, and Valenki felt boots already developing holes. The count took 40 minutes. Baimukhanov walked the line slowly, playing a flashlight across faces, checking mouths for hidden food. When he found a crust of bread tucked in one prisoner's cheek, he didn't strike the man. He simply confiscated it and reduced the entire barrack's morning ration by half. Collective punishment was the system's preferred weapon, turning prisoners against each other. They marched 3 kilometers to the work site in columns of 5 through the polar night, boots crunching on ice-hardened snow, breath crystallizing instantly. Guards flanked them on horseback, rifles slung casually. Running was suicide. The permafrost stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and the cold killed faster than bullets. The lead mine was a series of hand-dug tunnels carved into a hillside, shored up with rough timber that groaned under geological pressure. Rost's assignment was face work, attacking the ore seam with a pickaxe, crouched in a tunnel barely high enough to kneel. The lead-rich rock glittered silver-grey in the lamplight, beautiful and deadly. Each swing of the pick sent vibrations through his bruised shoulders. Within the first hour, his hands bled through his threadbare gloves. Within 3, his back seized into a permanent spasm. The tunnel air was thick with rock dust that coated his lungs and left a metallic taste in his mouth. He filled a wooden cart with ore, dragged it to the surface, dumped it, and returned. 12 hours, every day. The noon meal arrived in metal drums on a horse-drawn sledge, watery soup of fish heads and cabbage leaves, served in the tin bowls each prisoner carried. Rost learned to eat slowly, making each mouthful last, the liquid's warmth more valuable than its calories. He learned to tilt the bowl to catch every drop, to scrape the sides with his fingers. Around him, men gulped their portions in seconds, driven by animal hunger, then shivered as the brief warmth dissipated. A German panzer officer, Gottschalk, sat beside him that first day, hands shaking so badly he spilled half his soup. He had been at Cape Desnev 4 months. His lips were black with frostbite. He stared at Rost with dead eyes. 2 weeks later, Gottschalk walked away from his work detail during a blizzard. They found his body frozen solid 200 meters from the mine entrance, his face peaceful. Rost understood then that the cold offered the only mercy available. 3 weeks became 6, and Rost's body transformed into something he barely recognized. His ribs railed beneath skin that took on lead's greyish pallor. His gums bled constantly from scurvy. The frostbite on his left foot turned 2 toes black. They fell off one morning, leaving suppurating wounds that refused to heal. He lost 20 kilograms. His mind adapted, narrowing its focus to the next meal, the next breath. Abstract thoughts, home, family, freedom, became impossible luxuries. By the 2nd month, he stopped counting days. Time was measured in work shifts and ration distributions. He began to notice the others who were still fighting. Maximov, a Moscow engineer, had made a crude calendar from scavenged wire hidden in the barrack rafters. He marked each day with obsessive precision, whispering the date to anyone who asked, as if keeping time was an act of resistance. From Maximov, Rost learned the guard rotations marked by starlight through the barrack window. The NKVD operated in 6-hour shifts. The weakest guards, the oldest or most hungover, worked the pre-dawn rotation. This was when the camp's attention slackened, when a man might steal an extra minute of warmth. Then there was Volkov, a Red Army soldier captured by the Germans, then recaptured by the Soviets and sent to the Gulag for the crime of being taken alive. Volkov never spoke of his past, but his hands revealed his history. He could splice wire, repair machinery, and fashion tools from scrap. He kept screws, nails, and wire fragments in a tin buried beneath the latrine. When the barrack stove broke in late November, a fatal event in the -40 cold, Volkov repaired it with flattened tin and wire salvage. The guards never noticed. The stove worked, and that was sufficient. Seeing Rost watch him, Volkov later showed him how to wrap wire around a pickaxe handle to prevent blisters and pack moss into boots for insulation. Small acts of survival knowledge. The breaking came in different forms. A Ukrainian peasant, Shevchenko, began talking to his dead mother. The guards let him work until he was useless, then transferred him to the punishment barrack to die. A Latvian machinist, Berzins, tried to hang himself with a belt so rotted it snapped. He broke his collarbone in the fall. The camp doctor, a political prisoner himself, set the bone without anesthetic and sent Berzins back to the mine 3 days later. Rost watched it all with detachment, learning the taxonomy of death. He filed it away without emotion, an energy he couldn't afford. His own deterioration manifested as a persistent cough that rattled in his chest, producing grey phlegm flecked with blood and rock dust. Lead pneumoconiosis. During a mandatory health inspection, the camp doctor examined him for 30 seconds, noted the diagnosis, and moved on. There was no treatment. Rost would work until he couldn't, then join Shevchenko in the punishment barrack. The timeline was predictable: 6 months, maybe 8. He absorbed this and returned to the mine. Yet something shifted. It began not with hope, but with observation born from sheer repetition. A starving mind still seeks patterns. After 2 months of the same march, Rost knew every guard, every checkpoint, every vulnerability in the camp's rhythm. He knew Sergeant Baimukhanov always warmed himself at the supervisor's fire during the midnight shift. He knew the mounted guards never dismounted, their attention divided. He knew the camp lacked a perimeter fence. The permafrost was a prison more effective than any wall. He learned these things without trying, the way a man learns a familiar room in darkness. The moment that changed everything came in late December. The supply truck arrived, as it did every 10 days. A Studebaker US-6, delivered under Lend-Lease and repurposed for Gulag logistics. Rost was hauling ore when he heard its distinctive rumble, a sound so alien in the tundra's silence it stopped him mid-step. From the mine entrance, he watched 2 NKVD officers unload crates of supplies and mail for the guards. The truck sat idling for 20 minutes, its breath steaming in the headlights while the officers checked manifests. Then the driver climbed back in, shifted into gear, and drove west toward the supply depot of Providenia. The truck followed the same packed snow road every time. Rost stood in the mine entrance, pickaxe in his bleeding hands, and something clicked in his mind with the precision of a rifle bolt. The truck traveled 180 kilometers to Providenia, where ships left for Vladivostok during the brief ice-free season. But it was December. The ships were gone for the year. The truck still ran, or the camp would starve. The driver was a careless civilian, not NKVD, and left the truck running during deliveries. The guards never searched it on departure. Who would be insane enough to escape when the cold killed within 20 kilometers? Rost watched the truck's tail lights disappear. He could drive. He'd operated Kubelwagens, Opels, even a captured Soviet Gaz. A Studebaker was not so different, but the calculation was brutal. If he reached the truck and drove away, the alarm would sound in minutes. At a maximum speed of 40 kilometers per hour on snow, they would catch him. Unless they didn't know he was gone, unless he disappeared during a shift change, during that lax pre-dawn rotation when a missing prisoner might not be noticed for 6 hours. In 6 hours, he could cover 240 kilometers, well past Providenia, into a wilderness where no one would waste fuel searching for a dead man. Maximov's whisper cut through his thoughts. "You're thinking too loud, German." The engineer stood beside him, skeletal, his eyes glittering with a new sharpness. Rost said nothing. Maximov produced a death's head grin, his gums black. "The truck comes every 10 days. Next delivery is January 4th. Guard rotation changes at 0200 hours. Baimukhanov will be drunk. It's Russian Christmas Eve, old calendar. He's always drunk on Saints' Days." The engineer spat bloody phlegm into the snow. If a man was foolish enough to try, that would be the night. The coldest, darkest night. The night when staying looks safer than running. Volkov appeared on Rost's other side, pressing something into his palm. A compass. No bigger than a watch face, its brass casing battered but functional. "Found it in the wreckage," Volkov said. "Soviet issue. North is north, even here. Providenia is west-southwest, bearing 250 degrees. After that, you're on your own." He paused. "The truck carries survival gear behind the driver's seat. Rations, fur blankets, flares. The driver never checks. He's going home." Rost looked at the compass, then at the 2 men who had given him more than information. They had given him a choice: return to the slow death of the mine, or run toward an almost certain death that offered a sliver of possibility. The mathematics were insane. The cold, pursuit, starvation, any of them would kill him. But standing in the mine entrance, compass weighing nothing in his palm, Rost felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope. Hope was too expensive. This was simpler. This was momentum. It was the recognition that the machine grinding him to dust had patterns, and patterns meant weaknesses. It meant a dead man could still choose the manner of his death. He closed his fist around the compass. January 4th, 13 days. He would need them to prepare, to steal food crumb by crumb, to study the truck's routine like a military operation. The work, the cold, his own body would try to kill him before then. But for the first time since the cattle car doors opened onto the Siberian wasteland, Rost had a mission. The German soldier who had survived Stalingrad wasn't dead yet. He was simply waiting for the right moment to walk out of hell and disappear into the darkness. Chapter 3. The Doctor's Gamble. The compass weighs nothing in Rost's palm, but it anchors him. Dr. Stauffer's words echo in the barracks' darkness. 6 months, maybe less. The lead in his blood carries its own certainty. The tremors in his hands, the metallic taste of every breath, and the grey tinge creeping across his skin confirmed what the doctor saw. Rost presses the compass to his chest, its hard edges a solid presence through his threadbare uniform. This small brass circle and a handful of matches represent something he thought he'd buried in the permafrost: choice. For the first time since the transport train crossed into Siberia 3 years ago, what happens next isn't entirely in Soviet hands. The transformation began immediately, though Rost forced himself to move with caution. Any change in behavior drew attention. Guards watched for resistance, like wolves stalking prey. But now, everything looked different. The morning count was no longer a degradation to endure, but an act of intelligence gathering. Rost stood in formation, his eyes tracking patterns. The senior guard, Volkov, arrived 7 minutes after the whistle, always counting the left column first and focusing on the front rows, giving the rear only cursory glances. Rost filed this away. The guard tower on the eastern perimeter changed shifts at noon and midnight. For 12 minutes during each rotation, the searchlight swept a predictable pattern, leaving a blind corridor along the wire for a man who knew precisely when to move. Before, these were meaningless details. Now they were components of a plan. The mine shaft became his training ground, not his tomb. Rost volunteered for the deepest tunnels, the most dangerous excavations where lead dust hung thickest. The guards thought he was embracing death, not secretly testing his endurance, pushing his poisoned body to its limits. How long could he work before the tremors became uncontrollable? 4 hours. How much weight could he carry before his legs buckled? 30 kilograms. How far could he walk before needing rest? The 800-meter walk from the mine entrance to the processing shed left him gasping. He catalogued these numbers with brutal honesty. The wilderness beyond Cape Dezhnev stretched for hundreds of kilometers. His body, even before the poisoning, would have struggled. Now the calculation seemed insane, but staying guaranteed death. The only variable was how long the dying would take. He began studying other prisoners with new purpose. There was Dietrich, a former Wehrmacht quartermaster, who hoarded food with an efficiency that revealed security gaps in the barracks wall. Klaus, a former mountain infantryman, made casual comments about navigation and survival that Rost absorbed like a drought-stricken field absorbs rain. The Soviet prisoner Yuri, a fisherman arrested for anti-Soviet agitation, knew the Bering Strait, its currents and seasonal patterns, information that might mean everything. Trust remained impossible. The camp bred informers, and the NKVD cultivated desperation with offers of extra rations or reduced sentences for information. Rost had seen men disappear after careless words, so his questions came wrapped in casual conversation, spread across weeks, never revealing a pattern. He would mention missing the mountains, and Klaus would talk about reading terrain. He would complain about the cold, and Yuri would mention the brief warming period in late July when fog rolled in from the sea. Each fragment was a piece of a puzzle Rost assembled in silence. His supplies were hidden with an operational security learned in the Wehrmacht, adapted for a new kind of war. The compass was wrapped in cloth inside a tier in his mattress straw. Matches were kept in a small tobacco tin tucked into his boot. Dr. Stauffer's medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic powder, and precious morphine ampules were distributed across 3 separate hiding places. If guards discovered one cache, the others might survive. The principles remained the same: compartmentalize information, maintain redundancy, assume compromise. The camp's daily rhythm revealed exploitable gaps. Mail arrived every second Tuesday, creating a 40-minute period of chaos in the administration building as guards processed packages. Prisoner work details were reassigned based on production quotas. When quotas lagged, the most experienced miners, including Rost, were sent to deeper, more distant shafts. Shaft 7 was over 2 kilometers from the main compound, a distance where guards relied on dogs and periodic patrols rather than constant supervision. During blizzards, which struck with regularity, visibility dropped to arm's length. The guards retreated to shelters and the dogs stayed kennelled. Rost finally understood why no one escaped Cape Dezhnev. It wasn't the wire or the guards or the dogs that made it impossible. It was the land itself. The nearest settlement lay 200 kilometers southwest across mountains that killed even well-equipped expeditions. The Bering Strait stretched 90 kilometers to Alaska, but the water guaranteed death by hypothermia in minutes. North led to the Arctic Ocean. East and west offered only more wilderness. The geography was a prison more absolute than concrete, a fact the guards knew well. Commandant Petrov had said it himself after one prisoner was shot trying to climb the wire. "The tiger will do what we cannot. It will kill you slowly." Most prisoners accepted this logic. Rost might have too, before the doctor's diagnosis gave him a deadline measured in weeks, not years. The plan formed not as a vision, but as a series of smaller decisions. First, he had to leave during summer. The brief warm period from mid-July through August offered the only survivable temperatures. Second, he needed maximum supplies, hoarding every scrap of food and useful material. Third, he had to cover as much ground as possible before his absence was noticed. Leaving during the night shift change at midnight would give him a 6-hour head start before the 0600 hours morning count. The final, most agonizing calculation was direction. Southwest toward inhabited areas meant 200 kilometers of mountains he could not cross. East toward the Bering Strait meant 90 kilometers, but what then? He couldn't swim to Alaska, and the strait's summer ice floes were impassable. Yet Yuri had mentioned fishing vessels. American and Soviet boats worked these waters. A man who reached the coast might signal a boat. It was a desperate hope stacked on impossible odds, but it was less impossible than crossing the mountains in his condition. He marked July the 15th, 1952, in his mind as the target. 6 weeks remained. Dr. Stauffer's 6-month estimate had become a countdown as his strength ebbed and the tremors worsened daily. But 6 weeks might be enough. He started hoarding food, a piece of bread tucked away, fish oil saved from the thin soup, stored in a small bottle for calories. He took an extra pair of work gloves from a dead prisoner before the body was hauled away. Every preparation was executed with paranoid caution. The physical training continued in secret. Rost forced his deteriorating body through push-ups behind the barracks and walked laps that appeared aimless but built endurance. The effort exhausted him, but he noticed slight improvements. The shaking in his hands stabilized during exertion. His breathing became marginally less labored. Dr. Stauffer's shared rations and medical supplies were buying time. But the hourglass ran empty, regardless of preparation. Still, Rost felt something he hadn't experienced since capture: agency. He was acting instead of enduring, planning instead of merely surviving. The difference transformed everything, even as it changed nothing about the fundamental reality. Cape Dezhnev kills everyone eventually. The only question was whether death would come inside the wire or during a final bid for freedom. One evening in late June, Rost caught Dr. Stauffer's eye across the barracks. The doctor gave a slight nod, a gesture invisible to anyone not watching for it. The supplies were ready. The plan was as complete as it would ever be. Rost nodded back, the decision crystallizing with absolute finality. July 15th, midnight. Shaft 7 detail. A blizzard would help, but he couldn't wait for perfect conditions. His body wouldn't allow delays. The lead poisoning was accelerating. Yesterday he had coughed blood. This morning his vision had blurred for 20 minutes. 6 months was optimistic. He might have 6 weeks. He might have less. The mental shift from prisoner to escapee was complete. Rost stopped thinking about surviving the next meal or the next shift. His mind lived entirely in the future, in the moment he would cut the wire and begin walking. Everything became preparation for that instant. Sleep became strategic, meals fuel calculations, every conversation an opportunity for intelligence. The camp hadn't changed, but his relationship to it had transformed. He was no longer one of the condemned masses shuffling toward a slow death in the mines. He was a soldier behind enemy lines. The Wehrmacht uniform was long gone, replaced by prison rags, but the mentality had resurfaced. The guards noticed nothing. To them, Rost was just another dying German, working his final weeks before the lead finished him. This invisibility became his greatest asset. They didn't guard corpses carefully. The tower searchlights swept past him without interest. His name was called at formation and forgotten immediately after. In their eyes, he was already dead. This presumption of his irrelevance, his utter defeat, created the smallest crack in the otherwise impenetrable security, a crack he intended to exploit fully. Rost stared at the Arctic sky through gaps in the barracks roof, watching the midnight sun that never fully set during these brief summer weeks. Somewhere beyond that sky, beyond the wire and the tiger, a life existed that didn't involve mines or Soviet guards. He would probably never see it. The odds dictated death within days of escape, maybe hours. But Dr. Stauffer was right about one thing. Dying while walking free beats, dying as a slave. The choice came down to how he wanted his story to end, on his knees in a mine shaft or on his feet, moving towards something beyond this frozen hell. The decision made itself. 15 days until midnight on July 15th. 15 days until he discovered whether the compass led to freedom or just a different kind of grave. Chapter 4. A step into the white abyss. The plan was brutally simple. No forged papers or tunnels, just the Siberian winter turned against itself. During a blinding blizzard, when guards valued warmth over head counts, Rost walked away from a work detail. He dissolved into the whiteness. No alarm, no dogs. The Gulag's arrogance was his shield. Why search for a man sure to freeze? He was a dead man walking south, towards life, home, and warmth thousands of miles away. His first steps were terrifying. Alone with a compass and a dying man's blessing, he'd traded a slow death in the mine for a fast one in the snow. But for the first time in years, he was master of his own fate. The method chose itself. At Camp 5110, Rost had seen men die in dozens of ways, but winter claimed more lives than starvation, disease, and beatings combined. When temperatures fell to 40 below, the wilderness became an impassable wall. No one escaped Siberia in winter, which meant no one expected anyone to try. For 3 weeks after receiving the compass, Rost studied the storms. He watched blizzards erase the world and learned how the guards reacted. They retreated, huddling in their posts and abandoning patrols. They trusted winter to do their job. The camp's greatest weapon was also its greatest weakness. He took felt boots from the belongings of a Ukrainian who had frozen solid at roll call. The boots were good, relatively new. Rost grabbed them unseen, stuffed them with dried grass for insulation, and hid them under a loose board in his bunk. His feet were size 41, the boots 43. The room for extra rags could mean the difference between circulation and frostbite. The padded jacket came harder. Near the mine entrance was a shed with coats for the free workers. Rost stole one over 4 days, in pieces. First the buttons, clipped with a shard of metal, then strips of quilted lining from inside the back. Finally, during a drunken foreman's shift change, the entire coat. He wore it out under his prison jacket, sweating with fear, but no one looked. To the guards, prisoners were interchangeable. He nearly lost everything. A new, zealous guard decided to search the barracks while Rost was at the mine. He returned to a torn-apart bunk, the felt boots sitting on the floor. The guard, a young farm boy, stood over them. "Whose are these?" The barracks went silent. Rost stepped forward, heart pounding. "Mine, comrade guard, from the Ukrainian who died. The elder gave them to me." A lie. The elder sat bunked away, eyes wide. The guard eyed the boots, then Rost's feet wrapped in tire rubber. He looked to the elder. "This true?" After a 2-second hesitation, the elder nodded. "He earned them. Good worker." The guard kicked the boots at Rost. "Wear them. If I see you in those rags again, I'll know you sold them." After he left, Rost pulled the boots on with shaking hands. The elder later approached his bunk. "You're planning something," he stated. "Go soon. That guard will remember." Food was impossible to hoard, as any saved portion would be stolen. But Rost found a way. Engineers at the mine sometimes discarded scraps, crusts, mouldy cheese, trimmed fat. He collected these in a cloth bag, burying it in a new location each night. Over 3 weeks, he accumulated 2 kilograms of frozen, rancid sustenance. It was enough for 3 days, if he was lucky. After that, he would starve, only colder and while on the move. The compass was his nightly prayer. Beneath his blanket, he'd watch the needle settle south, memorizing the heading. His options were grim. China was impossibly far, Mongolia lay across deadly mountains, and Kazakhstan was thousands of kilometers through hostile Soviet territory. Every direction meant death, but he chose south. The compass was poor quality, with cracked glass and a sticking needle, but it pointed away. That was enough. He told no one. A partnership here simply meant 2 men dying instead of 1, requiring a trust he couldn't afford. He'd seen men betray friends for a bread ration and preferred to die alone than be dragged back by a whisper. His physical preparation was grim arithmetic. His body was consuming itself, yet he forced himself to move. During breaks at the mine, he walked small circles, building what endurance starvation allowed. Other prisoners watched with dull incomprehension. He let them think him mad. Madness was safer than suspicion. The weather turned on November 19th. By noon, the sky had darkened, and a north wind smelled of metal and ice. The barracks elder, a veteran of 3 winters, looked at the sky. "Big one," he announced. Rost's pulse quickened. It meant now or never. At dawn the next morning, a work detail of 20 prisoners and 2 miserable guards departed for a timber site 3 kilometers away. The storm was imminent. At 38 below zero, the guards hurried the prisoners with curses, eager to finish and get back to warmth. At the timber site, the storm hit. The world vanished into a scream of wind and horizontal snow. Visibility dropped to nothing. As guards shouted for the prisoners to huddle, Rost stood at the group's edge. He wore every stolen layer, a compass in his right pocket and frozen scraps in his left. This was the moment. He took 1 step backward, then another. A guard's muffled head count was lost in the wind's confusion. He turned south and walked, steady and purposeful. 10 meters, 20. The group disappeared. He was alone in the forest. The first hour was pure terror. Every sound was a guard, every shadow a search party. He forced his breathing to slow, conserving heat. The wind clawed at him, the cold absolute. His feet were already numb. He checked the compass every 50 paces, always pushing south. The storm was both ally and enemy. It hid him and erased his tracks, but it also blinded and disoriented him. He stumbled over roots and through deep drifts, following animal paths when he found them, grateful for the packed snow but terrified of wolves. He had only his hands for defense. After 2 hours, adrenaline faded to leaden exhaustion. Every step was a conscious effort. The cold settled in his bones. He couldn't feel his face or fingers. Frostbite was setting in. He stopped against a tree and forced himself to eat, chipping at the frozen scraps with his teeth. It tasted of cardboard and life. He ate until his stomach cramped, then moved on. As daylight faded, he knew he had to build shelter or die. He found a cluster of spruce trees and, with numb hands, scraped snow into a wall on the windward side. When it was waist-high, he crawled into the hollow, pulled snow over the entrance, and sealed himself in. In the muffled darkness, he lay curled, shaking violently, waiting for either warmth or death. The night was eternal. He drifted in and out of a shivering consciousness. The snow shelter held, its insulation raising the temperature from fatal to merely killing. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't actively freezing. Inside, Clemens Farrell, former soldier and now fugitive, clung to life. Dawn came grey and bitter. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed world of 2-meter drifts under a pale sky. The temperature had dropped to 50 below. He stood, swaying, and saw that the storm had erased his tracks. North was the camp, south was everything else. He was a ghost in the emptiness. He checked the compass with fingers he couldn't feel and started walking south. His food was gone, eaten in the night. The first village was hundreds of kilometers away. The guards might be searching, or they might have written him off as dead. Another body for the spring thaw. He simply walked. The silent white and black forest stretched endlessly. Far behind him, the camp's brutal machine ground on. Men went to the mine. Guards counted heads, but Clemens Farrell walked south, one step at a time, into the white abyss where death waited in every direction and freedom waited beyond. Chapter 5. The Indifference of the Machine. Back at the lead mine, Rost's absence wouldn't have caused panic. It likely wouldn't be noticed until the next formal head count, perhaps a day later. When the discrepancy was found, the reaction would be bureaucratic, not dramatic. A cynical guard would make a note in a ledger, "Escaped." Another would have scoffed, "The wolves have him already." In the brutal calculus of the Gulag, a single escaped Zek from a remote camp like Cape Desnev was an acceptable loss, a rounding error. The environment was the real prison wall. No formal manhunt would be launched. It was a waste of fuel, manpower, and time. The official report would list him as escaped, presumed dead, closing the file. This institutional indifference was the most chilling testament to the camp's inhumanity. Rost wasn't a person who had escaped. He was a tool that had been lost, written off as broken, and left for the elements to claim. They hadn't just forgotten him. They had preemptively buried him under a mountain of paperwork and Siberian snow. Rost had no knowledge of this bureaucratic dismissal as he stumbled through the third day of his southward march. The immediate reality consumed everything. 1 foot forward, then the next, breathing through cracked lips, eyes scanning a terrain of brutal emptiness. The tundra stretched in every direction, a colourless expanse broken by stunted vegetation and gullies. His legs moved mechanically, the muscles burning with an ache that became numbness. The makeshift bindings on his feet had disintegrated, and each step sent jolts through swollen ankles inside his camp boots. The boots themselves were falling apart, soles separating from cracked uppers. Grass stuffed inside for insulation had compacted into useless lumps, rubbing new blisters onto old. His hands, wrapped in cloth torn from his trousers, were numb at the fingertips. He clenched and unclenched them, forcing circulation against the threat of frostbite. The sun hung low even at midday, casting treacherous shadows. He followed a dry streambed for hours, reasoning it might lead to a larger waterway and settlement. Too exhausted and disoriented for a direct route, he followed its curves as his vision played tricks. Twice he stumbled toward imagined structures that resolved into rock formations. The hallucinations stemmed from hunger and exhaustion. He'd eaten nothing but a handful of shriveled, bitter berries, chewing them slowly despite the cramps. Water came from snow melted in his mouth, a process that burned precious calories and left him colder. He was consuming himself, his body cannibalizing itself in slow motion. His rational mind understood he had perhaps 4 days before collapse, but 4 days to where? The landscape gave no answers. He crested a low rise and froze. Below, perhaps a kilometer distant, smoke rose from a structure. His heart hammered against his jutting ribs. A settlement meant people, and people meant danger. Soviet civilians in this region would likely turn him in from loyalty or fear of harboring an escapee. But the smoke also meant warmth, food, and a chance at survival. He dropped to his knees, studying the scene as if his life depended on it. The structure was a small, isolated cabin, likely a hunter's shelter. No vehicles, no multiple chimneys. One building with smoke trickling from a makeshift flue. He weighed his scenarios: approach in darkness, steal what he could, and disappear, or avoid it entirely, preserving his invisibility. But his body was failing. Another day without food, and he wouldn't have strength for any approach. The decision crystallized with brutal simplicity: risk or die. He waited as the sun descended, watching for movement. Twice he saw a figure emerge, indistinct at this distance, carrying what might have been firewood. One person, he determined, better odds. When absolute darkness came under heavy cloud, Rost began his approach. He moved in a crouch, each step placed carefully, though the wind likely covered any sound. The intensifying cold bit through his clothes, but sharpened his focus. This was survival distilled to its essence. He reached the cabin and pressed himself against the rough wooden wall, listening. Inside, someone moved, a clink of metal, footsteps, a cough. Definitely one person. The door was on the opposite side. A small window covered with oiled paper glowed faintly. He edged around the structure until he could see the door, secured only by a simple latch. His hand reached for it, then hesitated. Breaking in meant confrontation. Retreat meant certain death. He lifted the latch. While Rost's fingers touched frozen metal 100 kilometers from Cape Desnev, the camp's morning count revealed his absence. The discovery was accidental. A junior guard, Mikhail Sokolov, found disturbed floorboards during a routine inspection in Barrack 7. Beneath them was an empty cache where Rost had hidden supplies. The Zek was gone. Sokolov processed this, then walked slowly towards the guard post. He was in no hurry. A missing prisoner was an administrative problem, and over-eagerness could backfire. He found senior guard Petrov smoking outside the administration building. Their conversation was brief, and Petrov's expression didn't change as he was told. Crushing his cigarette, Petrov spoke, and Sokolov shrugged. Together, they walked to the commandant's office, their pace deliberately slow, 2 men reporting a minor irregularity in the vast machinery of the Gulag system. Camp Commandant Boris Yegorovich Volkov, 53, was a veteran of the purges who survived in the NKVD through perfect paperwork and minimal initiative. When Petrov reported the missing Zek, Volkov first checked the register. Prisoner 3847G Rost Cornelius. German, lead mine detail. No disciplinary issues, no prior escape attempts. The commandant lit a cigarette, staring at the ledger. An escape from Cape Desnev was practically a non-event. The nearest Soviet settlement, Ulan, was 100 kilometers southwest, accessible only by foot across terrain that killed well-equipped men. A starving Zek in camp rags had no chance. The nearest non-Soviet territory, Alaska, was across the Bering Strait, a distance that might as well have been the moon. Volkov had been commandant for 6 years. In that time, 4 prisoners had escaped. None survived more than a week. 3 were found frozen or torn apart by wolves. The 4th vanished. Protocol was clear: but resource-intensive. Search parties, notifying regional command, interrogations, and triplicate documentation. Volkov calculated the costs: fuel, manpower pulled from the mines, radio explanations to Magadan, against the simple alternative: mark the prisoner as escaped, file a routine report, and let the Arctic finish the job it always finished. Volkov made his decision with the weary pragmatism of a bureaucrat who understood death was the Gulag's default outcome. He ordered Petrov to conduct a camp-wide count and search Rost's areas for any evidence of conspiracy. If Rost escaped alone, as appeared likely, the matter would be recorded and closed. No search parties, no emergency protocols. The environment was the guard that never slept. Petrov's detail spent 2 hours searching Barrack 7 and the mine tunnels, finding nothing but evidence of solo premeditation. By afternoon, Petrov reported back: 1 escapee, no accomplices, no security breach beyond the prisoner's own will. Volkov filled out Form 19B, the escape notification. Under action taken, he wrote, prisoner escaped into surrounding territory. Given extreme climate and distance to population centers, prisoner presumed deceased. Search operations deemed unnecessary expenditure of state resources. He signed it, had Petrov countersign as witness, and filed it in the metal cabinet where such documents gathered like tombstones. The process took less than an hour. No alarms, no dogs, no patrols. The machine had processed the irregularity and continued functioning. In the evening count, prisoner 3847G was simply marked absent escaped. Rost pushed the cabin door open. The warmth hit him like a physical wall. The single room was dominated by a stone fireplace where its occupant spun around, a ladle in hand. He was Chukchi, perhaps 60, his weathered face and traditional furs a sharp contrast to Rost's ragged state. A silent moment passed. The Chukchi's eyes assessed Rost's emaciated face, his disintegrating boots. The recognition was categorical. A Zek, an escapee. The man's hand moved toward a rifle. Rost raised his own hands in surrender. He had no strength to fight. The Chukchi's hand stopped. As Rost's legs trembled on the verge of collapse, the man's expression shifted from shock to calculation, taking in the starvation and frostbite. He gestured to the fire, then to a low bench, a pragmatic acknowledgement that Rost posed no threat. Rost stumbled to the bench, the heat on his frozen skin almost painful. The Chukchi ladled a thin fish broth into a bowl and held it out. Rost took it with shaking hands, forcing himself to sip slowly. The hot, salty liquid was impossibly rich. The Chukchi watched silently before filling a bowl for himself. They sat in silence, broken only by the crackling fire. Whether help or betrayal would follow was unknown, but for now, Rost was warm and being fed. He finished the broth as consciousness slipped away, overwhelmed by heat, food, and relief. His last thought was that he had delivered himself into this stranger's power. He would either wake to survival or not at all. Both outcomes seemed equally acceptable as the cabin's warmth wrapped around him and his body finally surrendered to exhaustion that had been building for months of captivity and days of impossible flight. Chapter 6. The 8,000-mile triumph. Rost's body is failing. 3 years of walking has reduced him to sinew and bone, stretched over a frame that once carried Wehrmacht muscle. His feet are masses of scar tissue, wrapped in rags torn from a tribesman's discarded coat. His face is leather, burned dark by sun and wind, eyes sunken so deep they seem to peer from caves. He is 43 years old. He looks 70. The Iranian border lies somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge or the one after. He has been walking toward it for months, navigating by stars and the position of the sun, guided by scraps of information traded from nomads and the occasional caravan driver. Every step south is a step away from the Gulag, away from Siberia, away from Soviet territory, and the ghosts of the men who died beside him are his constant companions. Every step is agony. His body wants to stop, to surrender to the vast, indifferent landscape. His will refuses. The border is close. It has to be. He cannot die this close to freedom. The final barrier reveals itself at dawn. Rost crests a rocky slope and stops, his breath catching in his throat. Below him stretches the Aras River, the natural boundary between Soviet Azerbaijan and Iran. The water runs fast and wide, swollen with spring snowmelt from the mountains. 200 meters across, maybe more. The current churns white over submerged rocks, a roar that fills the morning silence. On the far side, Iranian soil. Freedom, safety, home. There is a cruel beauty to the scene, the rising sun painting the water in hues of gold and silver, while its very power promises a swift, cold death. Between him and salvation flows enough water to drown a man in minutes. He stares at the river for a long time. His legs tremble, not from fear, from exhaustion. He has walked 8,000 miles. He has crossed rivers before, frozen ones in winter, where the ice cracked beneath his weight, and he had to crawl the final meters on his belly. He has swum through Siberian streams in summer, the cold shocking his heart into stuttering beats. But this river is different. This river is the last one. His body has nothing left. 3 years of starvation, of sleeping in snow, of running from patrols, of fighting off wolves and his own despair have emptied him. He can see the far bank, so clear it feels like he could touch it. He cannot imagine reaching it. Soviet border guards patrol this stretch. He spotted their barracks an hour ago, a thin plume of smoke rising from a chimney 2 kilometers upstream. They will have dogs. They will have rifles with telescopic sights. If they catch him here, this close to escape, they will not send him back to a gulag. There would be no trial, no paperwork. They will shoot him and dump his body in the river, an unofficial end to an unofficial life. The thought does not frighten him as it once might have. Death has walked beside him for 3 years, a familiar, silent shadow. What terrifies him is dying within sight of freedom. Drowning 20 meters from the Iranian shore with the indifferent current carrying his corpse back into Soviet waters. He must cross now. Dawn is breaking, casting long shadows that will soon vanish. In an hour, the sun will be high enough for guards to spot any movement from their towers. He has no choice. He starts down the long, treacherous slope towards the water's edge. The riverbank is rocky, littered with stones worn smooth by centuries of current. Rost removes his coat, the thick woolen tribesman's gift that saved his life through a winter in the Kazakh mountains. He secures it tightly around his waist with a piece of frayed rope. The cold hits him immediately, an autumn wind cutting through the thin rags that pass for a shirt. He does not feel it. He feels only the churning water ahead. He steps into the shallows. The cold is a solid thing, a fist closing around his legs, stealing the breath from his lungs. The current pulls at his ankles, testing his balance on the slick stones. He takes another step. The water reaches his knees. Another step. His thighs. The current is stronger now, insistent, muscular. It wants to take him downstream, away from the crossing point, into deeper water where the submerged rocks will batter him unconscious. He plants his feet and pushes forward, his entire being focused on the opposite bank, waist deep now. The current shoves him hard sideways. He stumbles, arms flailing, and catches himself on a submerged boulder. His hands are numb already. The water is snowmelt, barely above freezing. His core temperature is dropping precipitously. He can feel his body shutting down, pulling blood away from his extremities to protect his heart and brain. He has minutes, not hours. He pushes away from the boulder and commits fully to the current. The river takes him. He is swimming now, arms stroking in a clumsy, desperate crawl, legs kicking, but the current is faster than his exhausted muscles. He aims for the far bank, but the water carries him diagonal, inexorably downstream, toward the border guard station. His world narrows to a churning vortex of grey water and roaring sound. The cold is eating his awareness. turning his thoughts to sludge. His legs stop kicking, too tired, arms only now, pulling at water that feels thick as mud, each stroke a monumental effort. His head goes under. Icy water fills his nose, his mouth. He surfaces, coughing, choking, gasping for air that feels as cold as the river. The far bank is closer, 30 meters, 20. The current accelerates, pulling him toward a wicked line of rocks that jut from the water like teeth. He will hit them. He knows it. He cannot avoid them. His left shoulder slams into stone. Pain explodes through his entire left side, a white-hot nova. He grabs at the rock, fingers scrabbling, finding a crack, holding on with the last of his strength. The current tears at him, trying to rip him loose. His grip weakens. He pulls himself along the rock, hand over hand, using it as a shield to angle toward the shore. His feet find bottom. He is in the shallows on the Iranian side. He crawls, hands and knees on sharp river stones, water streaming from his clothes, lungs heaving for air. He crawls until the water is only ankle deep, then collapses face first onto the muddy bank, the smell of wet earth filling his senses. He lies there for a long time, perhaps minutes, perhaps longer, his mind a blank. His body is shaking violently, the uncontrollable tremors of advanced hypothermia. He forces himself to move, roll over, sit up. His left shoulder throbs with an agonizing pulse where it struck the rock. Broken or dislocated, he cannot tell. It does not matter. He is across. He is in Iran. He turns his head to look back at the Soviet shore. No guards are visible. No dogs are barking. The river kept his secret. He tries to stand. His legs buckle instantly. He falls back to the mud, tries again, gets to his knees. Through the haze of pain and cold, he can see buildings in the distance, maybe a kilometer away. A village or a border post. Iranian, not Soviet. He starts crawling. After 100 meters of agonizing progress, he manages to stand. He walks, weaving like a drunk, each step a negotiation between his iron will and his body's complete collapse. The sun climbs higher, its warmth a distant promise. He walks. His vision darkens at the edges. He stumbles, falls, gets up again. He walks. The buildings are closer. He can see people now. Tiny figures moving between simple structures. He opens his mouth to call out, but no sound comes. His throat is too dry, his voice broken from months of disuse. He waves his good arm, a frantic, weak gesture. No one sees him. He walks. 50 meters from the nearest building, his body finally surrenders. His legs stop obeying his commands. He falls to his knees, then pitches forward onto his hands. He can go no further. He has crossed the river. He has reached Iran. He has walked 8,000 miles from the Siberian Gulag. He is free, and he is dying. A shout in Farsi, running footsteps, hands on his shoulders, turning him over gently. Faces swim into focus above him, Iranian men in civilian clothes, their eyes wide with shock and pity. One of them speaks German, broken but understandable. "Who are you? Where from?" Rost tries to answer. His lips move, but no words form. One of the Iranians lifts a canteen to his mouth. Water, clean and cool, spills across his cracked lips into his mouth. He swallows, chokes, swallows again. "Soviet," he manages to whisper, the sound a dry rasp. "Prisoner, German, Wehrmacht." The Iranians speak rapidly to each other in Farsi. More men arrive. They lift him, carrying him between them toward the buildings. He weighs nothing. 3 years of walking has burned away everything except the essential machinery of survival. They take him inside a small mud brick house, lay him on a pile of blankets. Someone carefully removes his wet rags and wraps him in dry, rough-spun cloth. A woman appears with a cup of hot, sweet tea. They help him sit up, tilting the cup to his lips. The heat spreads through his chest, a wave of life returning. The simple taste is the most profound thing he has ever experienced. Tears run down his face. He cannot stop them. He is safe. After 3 years and 8,000 miles, he is safe. The Iranian border police arrive within the hour. They question him in halting German, writing down his responses in a worn notebook. Name, rank, unit, date of capture, camp location, escape date. His answers come slowly. His voice a rasping whisper between sips of tea. They examine his shoulder, their leader determining it is dislocated, not broken. Two men hold him down, while a third, a burly man with kind eyes, wrenches the joint back into place. Rost screams, a sound that empties his lungs and leaves him gasping. They give him a small glass of vodka for the pain. He drinks it, the first alcohol in 8 years. It burns going down, a fire that matches the one in his shoulder. They feed him carefully, broth first, then bread soaked in milk. His stomach, shrunken from years of near starvation, cannot handle more. He vomits. They clean him up without judgment and feed him again, slower this time. By evening, he can sit upright without support. By the next morning, he can stand and walk a few steps without falling. His body, a machine built for punishment, now remembers how to heal, though the process will take months. The intelligence value of what he has seen becomes apparent quickly. A British liaison officer arrives from Tehran, accompanied by an American from the embassy. They debrief him over 3 days, asking about the Gulag camps, their locations, the number of prisoners, the conditions, the guard procedures, the forced labor operations. Rost tells them everything. He describes the uranium mines where men died by the thousands, the logging camps where winter killed more prisoners than guards ever did, the railway construction projects stretching across the vast emptiness of Siberia. He draws maps from memory, his hand shaking but sure, marking camp locations across thousands of miles of Soviet territory. The officers take copious notes, exchanging glances when his information confirms their intelligence or reveals shocking gaps in their knowledge. You are the first escapee from that Far East to make it out, the British officer tells him, his voice tinged with awe. Your information is invaluable. Rost nods, feeling nothing. He does not care about intelligence value, he cares about going home. The journey from Iran to Germany takes 2 months. He travels by train to Tehran, where the Red Cross provides him with temporary documents and his first set of new clothes. From Tehran to Baghdad by truck convoy, from Baghdad to Damascus by rail, Damascus to Istanbul, Istanbul to Athens, Athens to Rome, Rome to Munich. The world rushes past him, a blur of strange foods, loud cities, and bewildering kindness. At each stop, officials verify his identity, doctors examine him, and aid workers provide food and clothes. He gains weight slowly, his body learning to process regular meals again. His shoulder heals, though it will never regain full strength. The nightmares begin in Tehran, vivid and relentless. He dreams of the Gulag, of guards shooting prisoners for sport, of the cracking ice on frozen river crossings, of the glowing eyes of wolves circling his lonely campfire. He wakes gasping, covered in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, uncertain of where he is. The aid workers tell him this is normal, that all returning prisoners suffer the same psychological wounds. It does not help. The dreams continue, a nightly return to the hell he escaped. Munich Hauptbahnhof appears through the train window on a grey morning in January 1953, 8 years since he left for the Eastern Front. 8 years since he was a Wehrmacht soldier fighting for a cause he no longer understood. 8 years since he knew who he was. The train slows, its brakes hissing. The platform slides past. Rost stands, gathering his small bag of possessions provided by the Red Cross. His hands shake. He sees his reflection in the glass, a gaunt stranger with haunted eyes. The train stops with a final jolt. He steps onto the platform. The station is exactly as he remembers it, and completely different. The war damage has been cleared away. New construction rises where bombs once left rubble. People hurry past, absorbed in their lives, their faces full of purpose, oblivious to the skeletal man standing frozen on the platform. He is home. He is a ghost. He does not know which is worse. Free, yes. But the hardest journey, learning to live again, has only just begun. Chapter 7. The Legacy of a Single Footstep. Cornelius Rost arrived home on Christmas Eve 1952. His family, long believing him dead, was stunned. He had walked 14,000 kilometers, over 8,000 miles, from the edge of the world back to civilization. His story, published under the pseudonym Clemens Forel, as far as my feet will carry me, became a sensation. While historians debated specifics, its core truth resonated in post-war Germany. Rost's journey was not one of battles or tricks, but a testament to the stubborn will to live. It gave a face to the countless German POWs lost to the gulags, their stories buried in permafrost. His escape was a victory not over guards, but over geography, despair, and a totalitarian system's indifference. He didn't just escape prison. He outwalked an empire's attempt to erase him. The skeletal man who appeared at his Bavarian door weighed 43 kilograms. His feet were scar tissue, his teeth lost to scurvy. The walk from the train station took an hour. His wife screamed. She had received his death notice in 1949, and his name was on 3 church memorial lists. His teenage children, young when he left for the Eastern Front, stared at a stranger. His proof was a wedding ring, carried for 3 years across Siberia, whose inscription his wife instantly recognized from 1938. That night, he told her his story, a secret she would keep for 2 years. In 1954, a publisher convinced him to dictate his account. He agreed on one condition, a pen name. He did not want attention. He wanted the men who died in Cape Desnev to have a voice. Als weit die Füße tragen sold 3 million copies in West Germany by 1960 and was translated into 18 languages. Ghostwriter Josef Martin Bauer received letters from former POWs verifying the brutal camp conditions Rost described. While many knew of escape attempts from eastern Siberia, none had heard of a success. Rost's account gave them permission to speak, though post-war Germany, focused on its economic miracle, preferred to forget such stories. Rost gave only one interview in 1955, refusing to be photographed. When asked the hardest part of his journey, he said, "Knowing I might be walking toward nothing." He declined all further requests, worked as a carpenter, and avoided veteran reunions. For the rest of his life, his wife said, he woke screaming twice a week. By 1965, the book had vanished from West German bookstores. As the Cold War hardened, publishers shied away from stories of Soviet brutality during détente negotiations. East Germany banned it as fascist propaganda, and West German schools ignored it. Historians questioned the timeline and impossible distances, noting the lack of documentation. Skeptics, citing the absence of Soviet records, suggested ghostwriter Bauer had embellished or fabricated the account. Rost, true to his desire to avoid scrutiny, refused to defend himself, telling family he knew what he had done. The book went out of print in 1972. By 1975, Clemens Forel was largely forgotten, his memoir relegated to university library shelves labelled questionable. Yet among former German POWs, the story lived on. The veterans' organization Verband der Heimkehrer kept copies in its offices. Men imprisoned in Gulag complexes like Kolyma and Vorkuta read Rost's account and recognized its truth regardless of verifiable kilometers. They knew the cold, the hunger, and the despair of a place designed for a slow death. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, his name was spoken at their gatherings, though documentation was impossible while Soviet archives remained sealed. The story existed in limbo, doubted by historians, believed by survivors, and unknown to the public. The rediscovery began in 1991. In a newly opened Moscow archive, researcher Dr. Bettina Greiner was studying German POWs when she found an NKVD file from Camp 503, Cape Desnev. An October 1949 report noted 5 prisoners missing after a storm. 4 were later found dead. The 5th was listed as presumed dead, body not recovered. The name was Rost Cornelius Obergefreiter. The date matched the escape date in his book. Greiner spent 3 more years cross-referencing records. She traced Rost from a 1943 Wehrmacht casualty list at Stalingrad to his POW registration, to transfer orders moving him ever eastward through the Gulag system until he reached Cape Dezhnev in 1949. Then the paper trail ceased. No death certificate, no repatriation record. He vanished from Soviet files only to reappear in West German records with a residence registration in Bavaria, January 1953. The gap was 3 years, exactly the time he claimed to have been walking. Greiner's 1996 publication concluded that while some details were likely embellished, official Soviet and German records supported the core claim. Rost escaped Cape Dezhnev in 1949 and returned to Germany in 1952. This sparked renewed interest, but a documentary crew discovered Rost had died in 1983. In a 1997 interview, his children recalled a silent man who broke his silence only once. When his grandson asked why he walked strangely, Rost demonstrated his outward-turned feet, explaining how walking on frozen ground had permanently damaged his tendons. Asked if it hurt, Rost said it hurt every day. Then he offered his only lesson from the ordeal. Pain is just information. It tells you you're alive. Further corroboration emerged in 2001 with declassified U.S. Army documents from the Korean War. A briefing paper on escape and evasion for American POWs referenced one documented case of successful long-distance evasion from a Far Eastern Soviet labor camp. Subject escaped 1949, reached friendly territory 1952. Details remain partially classified. Though Rost was not named, the dates aligned perfectly. American intelligence had evidently known of his escape, likely debriefing him or reviewing German reports, and deemed his account credible enough for their own training materials. The knowledge had remained classified for nearly 50 years. By 2003, Rost's case was included in training at U.S. military SEER, Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape, schools, as a prime example of extreme long-term evasion. It was not a tactical lesson, but a psychological one, how to sustain purpose over impossible timescales. While SEER training focuses on survival over days or weeks, Rost's journey illustrated a crucial concept. A former Vietnam POW and SEER instructor explained that the hardest part of captivity is the loss of forward motion, where every day is the same. By walking, Rost created that motion. Each step was proof that today was different from yesterday. The instructor, who kept a copy of Rost's book, noted that he understood a profound truth. You can endure anything if you can make the present moment different from the last. The book was republished in Germany in 2001, becoming a bestseller again alongside a new film adaptation. While historians still debated specifics, whether the ghostwriter simplified the route or Rost himself misremembered details after years of trauma, the core truth was now undeniable. Greiner's archival work and the declassified U.S. intelligence confirmed that Rost had escaped Cape Dezhnev and walked home. The exact path mattered less than the irrefutable achievement. In 2006, the German government placed Rost's name on Berlin's National POW Memorial. His daughter, attending the ceremony, said her father would have hated the attention, recalling a man haunted by survivors' guilt who never spoke of those who helped him. The ceremony also prompted a landmark acknowledgement from a Russian official regarding the deaths of hundreds of thousands of German POWs in Soviet camps. Rost's name on the memorial came to represent not just personal survival, but the survival of memory against a system designed for erasure. Today, Rost's story occupies a dual legacy. For military survival studies, it is taught not as a tactical manual, but as a case study in psychological endurance. Instructors emphasize the link between physical action and mental survival. By walking, Rost maintained agency, making decisions about direction, rest, and food, when the goal of captivity is to remove it. He was acting, not being acted upon, a distinction that can prevent psychological collapse. Historically, his account serves as vital evidence. As one of the few detailed first-person narratives from the Far Eastern gulags, it preserves priceless information about camp life that would otherwise be lost. His escape served a purpose beyond his own survival. He became a witness for the silenced. Cornelius Rost is buried in a small Bavarian cemetery, his gravestone bearing only his name and dates, 1919-1983. In 2015, his grandson walked the final kilometre from the train station to the family house to understand that last stretch of the journey. The walk took him 57 minutes. His feet hurt. He could not imagine doing it again. His grandfather had taken roughly 8 million steps to cross Siberia. He took every one of them. That is the irreducible fact. A man decided not to die. He walked until he was home. The guards who presumed him dead were wrong. The system that tried to erase him failed. He walked out.